All right, you guys see that okay? All right, so last time we talked about, well, coming up to this, and I'll cover this again, but really we talked about the Old Testament and the nations, and that how God was preparing Israel to be the vehicle by which he was going to save the nations. And so, of course, this obviously goes into the New Testament. And so today we'll be talking about Jesus and the nations. We'll actually focus on the book of Matthew and on some of the other things that we've been reading about and learning about over the last, I think, month, because the reason that I ended up doing this again was because it tied in so neatly to some of the themes that we've been studying. So, like when we were looking at the Magi and the mountain of assembly and the and also just the gods of the nations and those sorts of things. I was listening to the Bible Project, their podcast, and they started bringing up some of those themes in the a series that they're calling the Family of God. And so there's a couple conversations that I listened to. So I did lift a lot of this outline from those conversations, and then kind of what I did was that I bolstered them or changed them and added things that that were really pertinent to the things that we've been studying, including themes like exile. So just to recap a little bit where we're at, because I want to kind of follow this flow of thought. First of all, that God divided the nations according to the numbers of the sons of God, as it says in Deuteronomy 32. And what that refers to, the time that the nations were divided up according to the number of the sons of God, was at the Tower of Babel, right? But he reserved the nation for himself. So right after the story of the Tower of Babel, you see the story of Abraham, where God is going to reserve a nation for himself. That would be Israel, and he would build it through Abraham. So those same sons of God that he put over the other nations, I think I may have misinterpreted a little bit. I don't know if it's so much the Tower of Babel is really a story of it's a story of human rebellion, but I don't know if it's necessarily the story of the sons of God rebellion, but it does lead up to that. So, we don't have the information there, but really kind of what he did is he put them there as a placeholder until he could re-inherit the nations. And it doesn't mean that they were rebellious Elohim or rebellious sons of God at the time. And they were not the same group of Elohim that fell during, in Genesis 6. So, but we see in Psalm 82 that instead of shepherding these nations, that and instead of shepherding them right and leading them back to Yahweh, they actually end up abusing their positions, and they start letting the people be oppressed and just not running things right, and they actually lead men to worship them instead of the Most High God. So these are the ones that become the gods of the nations, and they end up being up to no good. They end up allowing the people or guiding the people that they're over to worship them instead of Yahweh. So these pagan nations that these gods are over, they're Israel's rivals. But when you go back to look at the biblical genealogies, they're also Israel's brothers. So all of the nations that are mentioned, basically, that are Israel's rivals, you can go back and see and trace back where they come from, and you have the specific ones mentioned, and you can always see whose son they were, and they're always somehow connected to Israel or the seed of the woman, that the promised seed, right? So the story of Israel versus the other nations mentioned in Scripture is a story about sibling rivalry. This is a fight between brothers, and Israel's chosen because Israel's chosen. God chose Israel because God chose Israel. It's not about them being better than anybody else, and it's not because of their ethical superiority, and the early stories about Abraham and his failings, and then his son's failings and his grandson's failings, and so on. They just kind of testify to the fact that, you know, God obviously didn't pick these guys because they were such morally upright people. So God remains true to Israel for one main reason, and that's because of the covenant he made with them. Um, and every time you see a covenant being made, this is kind of a side note, every time you see a covenant being made in the Old Testament, it's really a covenant that leads to peace, or it's an attempt at peace. So when Abraham even and makes a covenant with some rival nations, or people who would be rival nations, it is it's noteworthy there again, because it is a step towards peace. So he's trying to make peace with them. So Israel is the vehicle of God's of God's plan. Let me get rid of this. I don't know how this ended up here. Okay, so Israel is the vehicle of God uh, to reconcile the nations to Himself. So the idea of being elect is not in the Old Testament. It's about God's sovereign providence and His purposes. Now it's so there's a little bit of a difference between, you know, the elect. So we you know, like when we talk about predestination, election, those sorts of things, especially like in Calvinist traditions, it's about God deciding to save some people while not saving other people. It's not really about, those definitions are not really what the idea of election is in the Old Testament, and really not in the New Testament either. So here, this will explain the difference a little bit. So it becomes clear that one is not elect just because one is an Israelite, or that one is elect just because he's an Israelite. Israel is, as a people, as a nation, they are elect, but individual Israelites who serve other gods, not so much. So there's a distinction that starts being made. It's like, yeah, I chose you, you're part of the chosen nation, but just because you're an Israelite, or just because you're a son of Abraham, doesn't mean that you're in. And if you think that the day of the Lord is going to be good for you just because you're an Israelite, think again, because the day of the Lord is not going to be a good day for you because you're serving other gods. So, and on the same token, non-Israelites who play into who are loyal to Yahweh, and a lot of times they're living with the Israelites, they're woven in and they're included in God's plan, and to such a degree that even some of them become heroes in the Old Testament, and they also become they also take part in being in the lineage of Jesus, right? So we see that these members of these rival nations, that they become hero figures of many biblical stories, while the Israelite figures are portrayed as being disobedient, or quote unquote the bad guys. So when these people appear in these stories, these foreigners, you know, their nationalities are deliberately mentioned so that you can know that the writer is bringing attention to the fact that this is a hero, but they're from this rival nation. So it's done on purpose. It's a literary design, right? So furthermore, a number of these foreigners are included in the genealogy of Christ. And that's kind of where we're going to take it up with. And we're going to kind of like do a little bit of a tour through Matthew, or through, uh, you know, like we're going to skip through Matthew a little bit to see this. Um, so the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, and I'm in Matthew 1, 1 through 6. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the son of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. And Judah the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Okay, now pay attention. These are all men's names here, but then you get to Tamar, right? and Perez, and the father of Hezron, and the Hezron the father of Ram, and Ram the father of Amminadab, and Amminadab the father of Nashon, and Nashon the father of Salmon, and Salmon the father of Boaz by Rahab. So all of a sudden, it's another a matriarch, right? And by the way, these all have ties to the rival nations. We'll see that in a second. And Boaz, the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of David the king, and David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah, who is not mentioned here, but we know that that's Bathsheba, right? So why are these women included here? So this is a patriarchal society, and to kind of have these women mentioned in a lineage like this is it's not conventional, right? So Matthew is pointing out something because he could have taken a different route to do this. But this thing is really getting in the night. So the stories of these four matriarchs, Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and Bathsheba, they're linked in certain ways. So first of all, they're all foreigners, or at least three of them are, right? Or they're linked to foreigners. So Tamar is a Canaanite. So that's a descendant from Ham. Rahab is a Canaanite. Ruth is a Moabite, so she's a descendant from Lot. And Bathsheba here is the wife of a Hittite. Now, she could have been an Israelite, but what Matthew right here is associating her with, at least, is being a Hittite, because he says that, that David fathers Solomon, which is by the wife of Uriah, so as if he wants to bring Uriah the Hittite into there. Now, remember, Uriah the Hittite, that was another story, and this is kind of a side note, but that's another story where where the foreigner ends up being the one who's upright, who's faithful, who's true, and David, being even the king of Israel himself, is the one who's the scoundrel. He's the adulterer and the murderer and the guy who's out of line, right? So there's another story of the foreigner from the rival nation who plays the good guy, and the Israelite who plays the bad guy. So this is so Matthew deliberately calls her the wife of Uriah. Now, the second thing is that they're all involved, or most of them are involved in some sort of shady sexual relation. Tamar, she acts the harlot. She's the one who seduces her Judah, her father-in-law. Rahab is a harlot, and Bathsheba is involved in adultery. There's some people that will think of like Ruth as having done something sketchy when she lays at Boaz's feet and asks him to put her garment over her. I think it's a stretch, and so I'm not really convinced about that one. But here you see kind of like that these stories of these women that are interspersed like throughout the Old Testament in these positions. Their stories kind of intertwine with each other, and again, they're kind of like hyperlinked in a number of different ways, the same way that we've seen hyperlinks between these different stories, right? They make bold forward action. They're kind of aggressive in their action, or they're very bold. Okay, so Tamar, she goes out and she seduces Judah. Rahab, she illegally houses, hides, and rescues the spies. And then Ruth goes after Boaz. She chases him basically, and she's really trying to get married by this kinsman redeemer. So they all have this kind of boldness and kind of a like very forward kind of actions, right? And they all lay claim to the lineage of David. And actually, especially like in the story of Tamar, she actually keeps that lineage alive. And you could argue that all of them actually keep that lineage alive. So Matthew wants us to retain this theme in the back of our minds when he tells the Jesus story. So it's kind of like, okay, here's the lineage. I've kind of like brought some attention to these Gentile women's names. Keep that in the back of your mind because he's going to lay down two themes. Okay, one of them is going to be Jesus' primary mission, and which is to reach the lost sheep of Israel, and the other one is that at the same time something's happening with the Gentiles. So the theme of the Canaanite women is also going to come back. So we've seen two Canaanites here, but later it's going to, that Canaanite woman theme is going to resurface when you have a Canaanite woman who's looking for healing, right? And what he does is Christ is going to do those two themes are going to kind of come together right then. And on one hand, where Jesus says, you know, well, I'm sent to the lost sheep of Israel, but at the same time, here's a Canaanite woman and she gets healed because she does kind of with her forward action, right? So Matthew keeps bringing us back to Jesus' primary mission, and which is to save his people. But so like here, let's go to Matthew 1:20 and 21, and we'll be skipping around in Matthew a little bit. And it says here, and this is the story of, this is when the angel appears to Joseph. And it says, but as he considered these things, which is Joseph, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, do not fear to take Mary as your wife, for that which is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, which means Yahweh saves, for he will save his people from their sins. So you have an iteration right here from the start that Jesus is here to save the Jewish people from their sins. He's not talking about the nations. This is starting off with a focus um, on 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 Jesus being sent to save his people, Israel, from their sins. Now, before we go any further, let's go back to the passages of Isaiah. Remember last time we were talking about like how all the nations were coming to the mountain of God, and that and all that imagery, right? So that's you'll see that in Isaiah 2, also Isaiah 60. We're really going to focus on Isaiah 60 again. Um, it says, so first of all, Jerusalem is going to be the light of the highest mountains in Eden. So this is kind of, this is an overview of the entire book of Isaiah, the prophetic insight in the book of Isaiah. Okay, so Jerusalem is going to be the light. It's going to be the high on the highest of the mountains, and so you have that vision of Eden on the top of the mountain. And God will not only bring back the lost of Israel, so that's the primary focus, is the lost of Israel, them coming out of exile, but he will draw all nations, all men to him, right? So it turns out that who's ever on this mountain, the seed, okay, is going to be from the line of David, a king who's up on that high hill. So if you keep on reading in Isaiah, you see, well, this whole thing about, you know, the seed, this branch, the sprout from the root of Jesse, and the stump of Jesse is going to emerge and everything. And then you start seeing that who's on top of that hill really is the seed, right? Now, this is the seed of David, and he's carrying the entire call of Israel on his shoulders, so that the nation, and he's doing this because really you find out that Israel's never brought about their mission. In other words, Jesus, in a sense, becomes Israel almost in a lot of these poems and in these visions, because he's carrying the weight and he's carrying out the mission that Israel was supposed to do, only it's on his shoulders now, right? And then we see that that seed is a suffering servant, you know, especially in Isaiah 53. And so we get the lines start getting blurred sometimes, you know, like, is Isaiah talking about the seed or the suffering servant, or is he talking about the nation of Israel? And the way that, say, Isaiah 53, if you ask a non-Christian Jewish person who they think the suffering servant is, they're going to say Israel, right? And so you're going, well, sometimes you can read those passages and go, well, it's Israel, but it's talking about an individual. And then sometimes you go, well, it really is talking about a suffering servant or the seed, but it's really talking about Israel. So um it's almost, if you put all your eggs in one basket, then you have difficulty reading the rest of it. But if you start seeing that it's kind of like the language is kind of like fusing the two together, then it starts making sense. And that's going to become important, because Jesus starts not only showing that he is that suffering servant and the seed, and that he's carrying out the mission of Israel, but also he starts relaying that language, some of the language, to us Christians. We'll see that on the Sermon of the Mount. So the suffering servant is high and exalted and lifted up, just like the temple and just like Jerusalem. And he also gives his life for the many there on the high place. And of course, he is he's lifted high on a cross on a mountaintop, right? So if you put it all together, what you start seeing is that in Isaiah 60 are the nations flooding in to listen to a servant who is anointed to bring the good news. And it's that suffering servant. So when you get to Matthew 2, in light of Isaiah 60, and this is the story of the Magi, that star that Balaam saw, and it's the light of Isaiah. Um, it's it's um, it's seen by a couple foreign, or a handful of foreign sorcerers, right? And they come, and the Magi come, and they respond to the sign in the one born, the one born of the King of the Jews, while Israel's leadership is sitting on their hands. They're snoozing. So they bring the gold and frankincense of Isaiah 60. But in addition to this, gold and frankincense of Isaiah 60, they're also bringing myrrh. So Matthew is already kind of giving you something is like, hey, this is like just like Isaiah 60, only where's Israel coming back? And what's going on? And why are they not coming to the high mountain? And here's gold and frankincense and the wealth of the nations being brought to them, just like in Isaiah 60. But what's with the myrrh? And myrrh is an embalming product. So it's because, and it makes sense now with the suffering servant of Isaiah 53, right? So in Isaiah 60, the nations are bringing their wealth to the house of God, which is the temple. Here, Jesus is the temple. He is the place where God's presence is, and where heaven and earth are one. So Jesus becomes the temple. That's what this imagery is telling you. And then because this is, there's something wrong with the picture in Matthew 2. You see that Herod starts killing all the male sons, just like Pharaoh did. But instead, so Jesus has to flee, and he goes, which is an exile picture. But of all places, he goes to Egypt, which is the place where Pharaoh killed all the babies. So now the whole thing's been turned on its head, right? So not only is this an already but not yet passage, because you see that Isaiah 60 in some sense is being fulfilled here, but it's not the complete picture yet. So it's already not yet. But it's also yet another story of where the Gentiles, they're playing the good guys and Israel's playing the bad guys. So we skip over to Matthew 4 and we go to verse 23 to 25. It says, he went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues. So Jesus is starting his ministry, right? And he's proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction from among the people. So his fame spread throughout all Syria. You would take a note of that. So, here you start seeing interest from the Gentile regions, okay? And they brought him all the sick, those afflicted with various diseases and pains, those oppressed by demons, those having seizures and paralytics, and he healed them. And great crowds followed him from Galilee and the Decapolis, and from Jerusalem, and from Judea, and from beyond the Jordan. So beyond the Jordan is out of Israel territory, right? So Matthew is stressing those areas to point to an expanding geographically Gentile mission. These are, we can assume that some Gentiles are included here. They're probably by and large Jews from those areas, but he's just showing you, he's just starting to kind of like hint that, you know, the word of Jesus is going into Gentile areas. So Jesus has got his crew of Jewish disciples, but the onlookers, the people paying attention to it, they're both Jewish and non-Jewish. And so we're going to see more stories of these non-Jewish onlookers become participants in Jesus's story. So this right here is the first of 3 points where Matthew points to the expanding geographically Gentile mission. We have this, and then the second will be at the end of chapter 10, where Jesus first sends out his disciples, and you know that's when they see that that the harvest is ripe, and ask that the Lord will will send out laborers to work in this harvest. And then at the third is at the end of the book, which is the Great Commission, which is go out into all the world and basically reach all nations, right? So if we skip over to Matthew 5:1, and then also verses 14 through 16, it says, seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him. So he's going to tell the Sermon on the Mount. Notable here is, remember our mountain theme? He's basically teaching them on a mountain. So he's almost staging this a little bit like, he's staging this like one of the mountain assembly moments, right? Mountain of assembly moments. It's where he's going to do the Sermon on the Mount. And in that sermon, he tells them that you are the light of the world. So a city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lamp and on a stand, and it gives light to all the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. So now Jesus is calling his disciples the light of the world, which is reminiscent of the light in Isaiah 60. Okay, so they are the light to the nations, and they are now the city on the hill. He calls them the city on the hill. He cut just like the Jerusalem, or the New Jerusalem, right? Zion. So Jesus and Matthew paint this picture that Jesus' disciples are the hilltop city of Isaiah 60, to which the nations will come, and that they're going to come to because of the light, right? And he does this while he's taken them up on a hill to teach them the sermon on the Mount, and he sets the scene. And so what we see is this kind of like progression, right? Isaiah brings those themes from Yahweh and Israel to the seed and the line of David. He brings it down to not just Israel, but a particular suffering servant. And then Matthew and Jesus, they bring those same themes from the line and this of David and the suffering servant, and it starts getting transferred into his to his disciples. So of course, we know now that we are the body of Christ, and we become the temple. So we're the place where God dwells. We're his temple, where heaven and earth meet. So you get this language all through the New Testament, that we're citizens of heaven, and that his kingdom is not of this world, et cetera, et cetera. So after the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew is going to go on and to tell stories from the list of the sick people that are coming to Jesus. So some of them are non-Jews. I believe that there's 10 stories of miraculous healings that follow right after the Sermon on the Mount, and 2 of them will be portrayed as good guys, Gentiles who portray faith, in one case, beyond what's even shown in Israel, right? In the meantime, Matthew's going to keep on bringing back the theme that Jesus is the focus of the lost sheep of Israel. So he's going to keep that tension alive. One of those stories will portray both themes, the Canaanite woman. So actually, let's go through the Matthew 8. You have the story. Actually, let's go back and read the story of the centurion. This is one of those Gentile good guys, you know. When he had entered Capernaum, a centurion came forward, appealing to him, and said, Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, suffering terribly. And he said to him, I will come and heal him. But the centurion replied, Lord, I am not worthy that you come under my roof, but only say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man under authority with soldiers under me. And I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard this, he marveled and said to those who followed him, truly I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such faith. There's that comparison again. I haven't found this kind of faith with anybody in Israel. I tell you, now pay attention here. I tell you, many will come from the east and from the west, basically from Gentile territories, and recline at the table with Abraham and with Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven, while the sons of the kingdom, i.e. Israel, many that are from Israel, will be thrown into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And to the centurion, Jesus said, go, let it be done for you as you have believed. And the servant was healed from at that very moment. So Jesus very explicitly says there is going to be many that are going to come from outside of Israel, and they are going to recline at the table. They're going to dine and feast with Abraham and Isaac, like their family. And many that are going to be that are in Abraham's family that are going to be excluded from this. Let's go to Matthew 10, 5 through 7. It says, these 12, this is the commissioning of the 12 disciples, and he sends them out on a mission, right? It says, these 12 Jesus sent out, instructing them, go nowhere among the Gentiles and enter no town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel and proclaim as you go, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. So we see this, right? And he's telling them, don't even go to Samaria. So what do you guys know about Samaritans? You know, like why, you know, they're Samaritans are, you know, like, well, Samaritans were kind of considered half-breeds, right? So when Israel came back from exile and they came back, you know, like from Babylon, there are a lot of Jews that had stayed in Israel at the time, but they're not, but they'd intermarried. And so the Samaritans were kind of like these mix of Jews and a bunch of other people that had moved there in the meantime. So they kind of got ostracized from Israel, and the Jewish people kind of treated them as like not real Jews, and you know they kind of they were really prejudiced towards them, right? Now Matthew doesn't tell us about the Samaritan woman, but John, however, tells us about that. So we see if we skip over to John, then we see a story where like, hey, Samaria is being reached, and that's John's way of starting to kind of like like you kind of have Judea, which is the Jews, but then you go a little bit out from there and you go, okay, well, these are the kind of half Jewish people and they kind of have a connection. So then you get Samaria, and then like then you start seeing the rest of the world, so you see these concentric circles. In Acts we're going to see that it starts Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria to the ends of the earth, right? So by the end of Matthew, though, he's already expanded this, that the Great Commission will be an expansion to all of the nations. So Matthew 11, let's go there, starting in verse 20. Then he began to denounce the cities where his mighty works had been done, because they did not repent. So Jesus starts kind of chiding the Israelites. He's fulfilling his mission to reach the lost sheep of Israel, but they're not responding. And he says, woe to you, Chorazin, woe to you, Bethsaida, for if the mighty works done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, you would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. But I tell you, it will be more bearable on the day of the judgment for Tyre and Sidon than for you. And you, Capernaum, will you be exalted to heaven? You will be brought down to Hades. For if the mighty works done in you had been done in Sodom, then it would remain until this day. I think, could you guys both mute? I'm hearing something. For if the mighty works done in you had been done in Sodom, it would have remained until this day. But I tell you that it will be more tolerable on the day of judgment for the land of Sodom than for you. So Jesus starts comparing them and saying, hey, you're worse off than these Gentile cities that God took judgment on, because you're seeing miracles and you have your own Messiah here, but you're not responding. So it's going to be better for these enemy cities, right? Let's go to Matthew 12. While he was speaking, and this is starting from verse 46, Matthew 12, 46 through 50. While he is speaking, this is the part where people are trying to tell him that his family's there, but Jesus says, well, basically, who is my family? So while he was still speaking to the people, behold, his mother and his brother stood outside asking to speak to him. But he replied to the man who told him, who is my mother and who are my brothers? And stretching out his hand toward his disciples, he said, here are my mothers and here are my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother. So basically what Jesus right now is doing is that he is untethering the definition of family and from those he is related to by blood, and for that matter, nationality, to those, and he's connecting who his real family is to the people who are following God's will. Yeah, this is the kingdom of heaven, The kingdom of heaven isn't my family, and by extension, it's not even those who are my countrymen and who I'm related to. Who I am related to now is the people who are doing the will of the Father. Those who are in this kingdom, fighting alongside with me, they're my mother and brother and sister. Go to Matthew 15, verse 21. Now, this is remember we were just talking about, where Jesus is saying, woe to you, O Chorazin, woe to you, Bethsaida, woe to you, and then he brings up Tyre and Sidon, right? And so Jesus went away from there and he withdrew to the district of Tyre and Sidon. So he's going to a Gentile territory, one of the places that he said was going to be better off than the Jewish cities who were rejecting him. And behold, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and was crying, have mercy on me, O Lord, son of David. My daughter is severely oppressed by a demon. But he did not answer her word. He just ignored her, right? And his disciples came and begged him, saying, send her away, for she is crying out after us. And he answered, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. But she came and knelt before him, saying, Lord, help me. And he answered, it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. So she said, yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. Then Jesus answered her, O woman, great is your faith. Be it done for you as you desire. And her daughter was healed instantly. So even though they know that they are in Tyre and Sidon, and we know that reading it, right? Instead of calling her this Canaanite woman, Sidonian, or like she's called a Syrophoenician woman, I think in the book of John, no, it's in the book of Mark. Mark calls her a Syrophoenician woman. He calls her a Canaanite. And why is he calling her a Canaanite? Because he's attaching her and he's connecting her to the Canaanite women of the that were in the lineage of Christ, right? So now the question is Joshua. Well, okay, so let me let me explain it this way. Joshua, who's named Yeshua, right? Yeshua, Jesus is the same name as Joshua. They're both Yeshua, right? So Joshua's task was to rid the land of the Canaanites. Get rid of the land of the Canaanites. That's how he's going to save Israel, basically. So, but now how is this new Joshua, this new Yeshua, going to relate to the Canaanites? You know, he kind of is, he kind of tests her, and he kind of like brushes her off, it seems, but then he says, wow, this is an amazing faith, and may it be done to you as you've asked, right? So, is Jesus brushing her off, or is he testing her? And I've seen a lot of there's a lot of like it's a bit scandalous here, in a way, if you focus on that. But if you look at the storytelling of Matthew and the themes that we've been talking about, like that Jesus is focusing on the lost sheep of Israel, but at the same time, it's he's including the Gentiles and even commending them, and they're becoming sort of like the hero figures in this. Then you can see how all this kind of like starts coming together in this story. So in any case, whatever Christ is doing here, and I think that he's testing her. I think he's kind of like putting her in a situation where she is going to respond even more strongly, because I think we, the readers, and other people need to see the same sort of theme. And really the way that she responds is, again, forward. It's aggressive, and it's kind of like what Ruth and Tamar and like what they did is they're like, no, I really want to connect myself to this, or I really want to see this happen. And yeah, so they're very purpose driven women here, right? So in any so we see these themes being played out here. So Jesus's silence compels her to move, and she becomes kind of like Tamar, and towards Judah, and Ruth towards Boaz. Matthew 27 says, when the centurion, this is when Christ had died on the cross, right? When the centurion and those who were with him keeping watch, is Matthew 27. When the centurion and those who were with him, keeping watch over Jesus, saw the earthquake and what took place, they were filled with awe and said, truly, this was the Son of God. So, upon Jesus's death, the first person to truly recognize who Jesus is a Gentile. Now, Peter's absent, because Peter did say, "You are the Son of the risen God," but he's kind of AWOL right now. He's nowhere to be seen. So we have the first person, at least upon Jesus' death, who's going, "This was the Son of God who just died." Right now, think of Peter for a second, because it was Peter who to first recognize and at least state something to the effect that that basically state that that Jesus is the Son of God, and he did this while Jesus was alive, right? And that was, if you remember, at the gates of Hades. That was at Mount Hermon. So the rock that was at the foot of Mount Hermon, where Jesus would also be transfigured, because I think Jesus was transfigured there on Mount Hermon. So Mount Hermon is the place where the sons of God, or the Elohim, would come. The sons of Elohim would come down and start their evil when they came down in Genesis 6. So the transfiguration was done in the face of pagan nation gods. So now it's a pagan. Now we have a pagan who is a slave to the pagan gods, basically a Roman centurion who's been assumably serving pagan gods. We don't know that, but that's that's kind of like the assumption here. And he's the first who echoes Peter's declaration that happens there, where Jesus brings the fight to the pagan gods. So Jesus is building his church here, even like the way he said to Peter, on this on this territory, on this rock. I'm coming to enemy territory, or what's been perceived as enemy territory, and I'm building my church there, and there's nothing that their gates can do to withstand my church, you know. Now that Jesus is already starting to build his territory, his church on the territory of pagan gods, which is, you know, in this case, a Roman soldier. We go to Matthew 28. And this is after Jesus' resurrection. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee and to the mountain which Jesus had directed them. So it's interesting. Again, Jesus directs them to a mountain, right? You know, this is like, meet me at some mountain, somewhere in Galilee, I guess. We're not told where. I have a guess, but I'll tell you that afterwards. But again, he's going to set up another kind of, I think, mountain of assembly moment, right? This is another divine, you know, kind of like semi-divine council type of meeting, you know. It's got all these mountains, meetings on mountaintops. And when they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. So this is definitely like divine council type of language, all authority, you know, so like this is a done deal, all authority, not these other gods and all these, you know, it's been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations. So Jesus is saying that all these authorities, these principalities and their and authorities that Paul talks about, he goes, no, I'm above all of them. And because it's been given to me, I now have the rights to the nations. They're no longer, these nations no longer need to serve these gods. They can serve me. That's why Jesus is telling them, go therefore and make disciples of all nations. So it's that whole, everything that we've been talking about like the gods of the nations and the Mount Hermon and all that kind of stuff is, he's setting up another mountaintop experience, another you know, divine council type of moment. And he's saying, this is all mine now, and go therefore and go tell all nations now, because all nations now are mine, and or they will be mine, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you, and behold, I am with you even to the end of the age. Yeah, you know, like once you piece it all together, you're going, well, all these things fit. And it kind of like as a a last note here. So this is an old map of somebody living in Galilee, and not many mountains. I mean, there's like these mountain range. I kind of like to think that it's Mount Tabor, just because Mount Tabor is one of those mountains that is mentioned several, like in Deuteronomy. It's like a place where, like these pagans go to worship their gods and stuff like that. And then, so it has a reputation of being sort of like one of the mountains of the pagans, but then it ends up being in Israel. And then it gets mentioned in Psalms along with Mount Hermon as that God is like, like God is on top of Mount Hermon. And Mount Tabor is his, and all this. And so you start seeing this language of Mount Hermon and Mount Tabor in the Old Testament, where God is like, no, I'm taking over those mountains. So I kind of like the idea of Mount Tabor, but I really don't know. But it seems, at least in Galilee here, that takes place. All right. Any questions? Yeah. Yeah. Once you contextualize all authority, then you're going, yeah, it has everything to do with those principalities, powers, authorities, Rulers of the air. Yeah. 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 Right. Yeah. Yeah. Same here. Yeah. 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 The words are richer. They have more meaning behind them, you know, like with that. And then on top of him, that he's bringing them, that he's got these mountain meetings and that he's presenting himself as, you know, and saying, okay, I'm bringing you up here just like man was always supposed to be at the mountaintop in the presence of God, just like it's going down in the
Yes.
New Jerusalem, just as like the nations are being going to be drawn up here. You're the light of the world. You're the temple of God. You're like where heaven and earth meet. You're the kingdom from heaven, you know, or the kingdom of heaven. And you're the city on the hill. You're here with me. Uh-huh. Yeah, 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 you do, right? No, no, no. You know, like when we went up the mountain there at yeah, yeah, right, yeah. Yeah, something about like yeah. Last time when we were climbing up the mountain, you know, like going up to Lake Hume and like you know, it's like, boy, I could really kind of like you know, like I was thinking about the mountains and, you know, the mountain of God and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I can definitely see why like that imagery is used, you know. And then when you're thinking about like uh, I don't know, there's something. So yeah, like I hiked the Alps once, and then I don't know if you've been in the Alps. So
Oh,
we're in
wow.
like Bavarian Alps. Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's something about the Alps. It's just like nothing. Yep, yep.
Mm-hmm.
What is? Yeah, you know. Yeah, but you know, like when you're surfing, though, you know, it's like what you're doing is you're taming the chaos. You're kind of like you've got the chaos, but you're like you're reigning the chaos and ruling over it. That's, you know, hopefully, or you know, you're just gonna wipe out. You know, so
Wow.
yeah, there's a feeling that you get there on the top of the mountain.
So all those people that were with him up in the mountain
Mm.
would have, because they were Jewish and everything, they would have understood the gravity of what he was saying, like the
Yeah, I think.
importance and the correlation of like this is a place that people
Yeah,
came and worshipped and sacrificed to false gods, but all that authority should have been,
yeah.
all of that worship should have been given to him, the rightful king, this whole
So
time,
whether they were Jewish
and
or
recognize him as
whether
Messiah.
they were not Jewish, or even if they didn't understand the Bible, that entire culture all around them, including the Greeks and the Romans, they talked about holy mountains and, you know, Mount Olympus where the gods dwell and all that kind of, you know, they all had their mountains. So yeah. So when he brings yeah, so so Jesus like deliberately does this, you know, he has the Sermon on the Mount, he does, you know, it's the Mount of Olives, it's the Mount, you know, it's like he's doing all these mountaintop experiences with his disciples, right? And he's teaching them there. And it's and I, you know, whether they catch it or not, if you, at least to the Bible reader who like goes back and rereads and eventually kind of like starts thinking, what's with all these mountains, you know, they can start thinking, wait, you know, it's like there's something going on here where Jesus is really kind of like creating that atmosphere. At least he's creating that atmosphere, if not just telling them this is one of those moments. And whether you, an already but not yet moment, you know, like these are people that are destined for the Mount of Assembly and the heavenly council anyway. So I'm going to start meeting in the mountains now. Transfiguration. Crossing the waters.
Well, just making it to the top of the mountain is something.
Yeah. Cross the
It's an
Red Sea,
accomplishment.
cross Jordan. Yeah. That's a repeating theme. But how do you mean, like with the mountains?
Well, the mountains represent the presence of God.
Okay. Oh yeah.
But crossing the waters kind of getting some trouble.
Yeah. So the mountains you have up here, life and water, is coming from the mountains. But then when you get like further down, and the further down you go, and you start talking about like the chaos waters, because you're away from the mountain, away from the presence of God, away from Eden, away from all those things, and then what you have is wilderness, which is the symbol. Hello, Jerry. So you have the wilderness, which is a symbol of being away from God and of chaos and everything. But then, of course, the waters, which are, like the Israelites have to cross the Red Sea and also cross over the Jordan. And it's the same chaos waters that Noah is brought above and held above, And then, of course, when Noah, is like when the waters finally subside and the chaos subsides, he's on a mountain, again, and that's where he does the sacrifice. Good. So it's so you have like this. It's that theologians call it like cosmic geography. Okay, it's like you use geography and people can kind of like get their brains around it, but it's telling you something more than just about. It's talking about way more than mountains and water and those sorts of things. So those stories are all talking about like again Noah and being on top of the water. Well, with that goes back to Genesis 1, where the Spirit of God is hovering over the waters because it's chaos. It's lifeless and void chaos. There's even like the idea of like the chaos sea monster and later on we see images of God taming that. Um, No, the other gods are created beings, but they're I mean we call them we have this idea of like so I kind of do and I don't like the idea of the using the terminology gods. Okay, the reason I do like it is because I want people to understand that these entities were real. So a lot of people, when they think the pagan gods were just figments of people's imagination, no, they were real entities. Some of them were just made up, and like people made, like Hindus have like millions of gods or something like that. Yeah, so obviously a lot of them are made up, but what's behind them are actual beings that God created that worked with God in His heavenly council, but they went AWOL and they started like feeding themselves, and they like so really what Eden is the heavenly council mountaintop where God has His heavenly family, which includes the Elohim, who become the gods, right? Or what we call the sons of God, the angels, right? And He's got the earthly families, family, which is humans, and the design is for them all to work together. He loves the angels, He loves His human family, He's loved all of them, and He's always wanted them to participate in what He's doing. So it's like it's not like God needs our input or needs these angels inputs or whatever. But that's why I think that when it says let us make man in our own image, I think there's a good case that you could say, it's a conversation with the Trinity, but you don't really have you don't really I think you've got more support for the idea that like what God is doing is that he's having a conversation like he's having at the beginning of Job, or at you know, some other places where it's like one said one said another, like let's do this, you know, it's like I'm calling a shot, but let's do this. The only thing is that, like, you know, I don't think the thing that would go against that really is that, like, they're not really creating the way that God, because the next sentence is like, and God created them, you know. But I think that they were, like, they've always been involved, you know. We see that that's where.
In the creation, because you have in the table you have Father,
Mm-hmm,
children, which is the Son,
mm-hmm,
and the Holy Spirit is pretty much, if you look at the attributes of the Holy Spirit, that's mother's attributes.
uh-huh,
The confidant, the
uh-huh.
daily advisor.
All right.
That's mom's.
Yeah. You know, like I said, I think you can take it either way, but we do know for sure that when we know from the middle of Job, where is it? That it's like where God tells Job, were you there when the sons of God, you know, did this? And so they were there at creation. When they were there at the creation of the physical universe. Okay, so the angels who became the gods of the nations, they were there before. They were there before, yeah. And then we see also that vision that Ezekiel has of the king of Tyre, who is and he says, you were there in the Garden of Eden. You were, you know, dressed in majesty and all this kinds of. You, I think it's Ezekiel 21. Let me see. Let me screen share. Um, Look it up really quick. Ezekiel, I think 21. Where am I at? That's too many. Oh. So try ESV. Okay, it says, Son of man, set your face towards Jerusalem, preach against no. Let me see. Where was Ezekiel up against King Tyre? Ezekiel 28.
28?
Yeah. Whoops. Okay, prophecy against the king of Tyre. And he starts talking to him. Okay, it says, the word of the Lord came to me, son of man, say this to the prince of Tyre. Okay, prince of Tyre is, and really you're thinking, is he talking to a man, or is he talking about, is he talking to a spiritual entity here? And here, like, the lines get blurred. So it's kind of like, yeah, he's talking to the king, but he's talking to the spiritual force behind him. There's a demonic sort of like thing behind the king of Tyre, right? And that's who God starts. He says, because your heart is proud and you have said, I am a God, I sit in the seat of the gods. So he's there, he was like, I sit in the seat of the gods. It's like some kind of a heavenly council kind of a situation. But here it's like in the heart of the seas. So he set up his own thing or whatever. I don't know. But you are a man and no God. So it's like, okay, there he's talking to a man, right? Though you make your heart like the heart of a God. You are indeed wiser than Daniel. No secret is hidden from you. By your wisdom and your understanding, you have made wealth for yourself and have gathered gold and silver in the treasuries by your great wisdom in your trade. Okay, wait. I'm thinking. Okay, here. If you go down to verse 11, it says, Moreover, the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, raise a lamentation, the king of Tyre, and say to him, Thus says the Lord God, you were the signet of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. This is, you're talking about Satan here, you know? He's not talking just to a king anymore, you know? And every precious stone was your covering, sardius, topaz, and diamond, beryl, oxen, and jasper, sapphire, emerald, and carbuncle. And crafted in gold were your settings and your engravings. On the day that you were created, they were prepared. You were an anointed guardian cherub. I placed you. You were on the holy mountain of God. In the midst of the stones of fire you walked. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created, till unrighteousness was found in you. In the abundance of your trade, you were filled with violence in your midst, and you sinned. So I cast you as a profane thing from the mountain of God, and I destroyed you, O guardian cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire. Your heart was proud because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. I cast you to the ground. I exposed you before kings to feast their eyes on you. By the multitude of your iniquities and the unrighteousness of your trade, you profaned your sanctuaries. And it goes on from there. But you see that language there, right? It's like he starts and again, you know, it's like one of those things where you know, it's like the prophecy language starts bleeding over from one thing to another. In this case, it's like the king of Tyre to the evil force that's behind the king of Tyre, and he starts addressing a guardian cherub that was there in Eden at the beginning and on the mountain of God. That's where we explicitly see that that Eden was a mountain of God slash a place of the Holy Assembly. And when you see when you see, we see assemblies of God, or you know, we use that term, and we think the church. And you know what? We're right, but we just don't get the whole background of that. It's like when we say the saints means the holy ones, right? But it's much deeper than that, because the holy ones in all of the Old Testament never refers to people. It refers to the Elohim. Yeah. And all of that language, you know, the sons of God, the holy ones, the gathering, the assembly, the you know, that whole thing, all of it is it's language that's transferred from angels and heavenly beings to us increasingly in the New Testament. And that's where, you know, to the point where you go up and John goes to heaven, and what does he see around the throne? Yeah, he sees millions of angels and all that, but he also sees 24 elders sitting on thrones, and he sees people around the throne. And you know, and Paul picks that up on that in Hebrews 12. You know, it's all that language is being it's being transferred to humans, because it was our beginning and it's also our destiny. You know, it's that's how it's being portrayed.
So was Adam and Eve
That's good.
considered Elohim until
So,
they fell?
well, Adam and Eve, none of us were like, and no human was ever like Elohim. It's not because we're not angels, okay? But part of the heavenly council, yes. So there's a distinction between, you know, like the Elohim, because the Elohim means the spiritual beings. Okay, so it means the angels, basically. It gets translated into angels. Um, there is one time where a man is translated as Elohim, and that would be when the witch of Endor sees the vision of Samuel to speak to Saul. She goes, "I see Elohim," you know, and then and then he's like, "Oh, that's him," you know. He has her conjure up Samuel, And so there we see that the word Elohim gets used for a spiritual being. She's basically just saying, I see a spirit, you know? And so so basically when you say Elohim, you're talking about the spirit, a disembodied spirit, okay? When you're talking humans, you're talking about like the way, you know, we as modern Christians think when you die, you become a spirit, or your spirit lives on, but your body's gone. But we kind of ignore, even though we do talk about it, a physical resurrection, right? Right. It's all about a new body, okay? Because that is the promise. It's like it's the ancient Jew is not looking to escape earth and go to heaven and just be there, you know, or being in some other realm. It's about the renewing of his body and the renewing of the earth. That's why you have a new heavens and a new earth. But
the
we
differentiation between heaven
yeah.
and earth is not like it is now.
No, it's a yeah. We separate. Yeah, it's the united heaven and earth. The what Eden is. It's where heaven and earth are united, and God's family is His council, and they're ruling together, and that's kind of like the way. So with the fall, what happens is that it's actually not man that's cursed during the fall. It's the earth. The cursed is the ground because of you. So what you have is you have Paul, who brings up that all of creation is groaning as in birth pains, waiting for the sons of God, that's us, to be revealed. They're waiting for our resurrection and our getting being restored to what we need to be until creation can go on being what it's supposed to be, because we're in charge of it, or we're supposed to be in charge of it. So we will take, yeah, right. So yeah, once God really has His family back and the nations back and all those things, they become they rule the earth, and like they're supposed to, and the earth is full of God's glory, and it's full of the wisdom of God. That's why, and that's what all the you know, lion, the lamb, and all that kind of stuff. I'm sorry. Yeah. No, I think yeah.
Well, there's a verse that says we will know and be known. There's a verse that says we will know and be known.
We will know and be known. But Christ is the first fruits of that, right? So it's like on one hand, the disciples were like, they didn't recognize Him. At the same time, it's something they could relate to. They weren't like, and some really tripping looking, we don't know what it was walking along with us, you know, the guys that was walking down the Emmaus Road and everything. And Christ is having a, yeah, they showed up, and He had scars. So it's like there was definitely a connection to the, you know, like but something had happened. I mean, He's, you know, walking through walls, but He's still eating fish, and you know, so when Job 19, it says, for I know that my Redeemer lives, and I will see Him, you know, in my flesh I will see God, and He's gonna and He will stand upon the earth. Okay, so it's like there's going to be an earth, and He's like, my Yahweh is going to stand on the earth and in my flesh, and it's not going to be me, it'll be me and not another, you know. And even after my body is, you know, burned away and all this kind of stuff, yet in my flesh I will see God. So it's about a physical resurrection. Yeah, that's the hope. Yeah, that's the hope. It's not about, you know, like jumping into some other, yeah. So like in Revelation, the way that it kind of reconciles it, because you're going like, well, what happens in the meantime? Which is a little bit vague. Honestly, that's vague in the Bible. Jesus tells the guy on the cross next to him, He goes, today I'll see you in paradise, which is a name for Eden, right? Eden is paradise. It's the paradise garden, right? On the other hand, you know, you see the souls who were martyred for their testimony of Christ in Revelation 6. Yeah. and they appear under the altar, which is under the kind of like the. I'll get into that some other time. But he, and it says the spirits of those who had, So you're thinking, well, it's their spirits, but the resurrection hasn't happened yet, right?
I think a big problem we have there with reconciling this is because we think it our logical time is right. By God,
Yeah,
outside
yeah.
time.
Yeah, well, what he does is that he actually puts robes on them, tells them to wait until the full number comes in. But later, when you get to Revelation 20 or 19 or 20, then it says, "And I saw those who had been beheaded by the beast, and they came to life, and they ruled for 1,000 years." So there, it's kind of like and it says this is the first resurrection. So the event that you see the spirits of those who had been beheaded coming up in chapter 6 is not the resurrection. You kind of go, well, something hasn't happened yet, right? You don't really have the mention of that until Revelation 19, 20, around there. Yeah. And then they came to life, and it seems to be the same group of people. But
I think our hardest time is trying to put God's view into
Yeah, yeah.
small little people brains.
Yeah, well, Revelation is very much like it's like the entire Old Testament put in a blender, and then you're going, wait a minute, yeah, that's why I was going, wait, what this is all, like these are all quotes. These are all quotes from some other passage in the Old Testament or citations of that, right? And John is vamping off of all of it. So where we go wrong with like Revelation is we go into like eschatology camps. We go, oh, it's this has already happened. That's a historical view, or this is all in the future, which is the futurist view. You got preterists and you got post-mill, and you got all this, but it's a big vision of already but not yet. A lot of that stuff has to do with things that happened in the past, happened after John died, but in our past, right? Things that are going on right now, I believe, are written about in Revelation, but it's also looking to the future. I think it's all of the above.
I guess they got us outside of our little time.
Yeah,
scale.
yeah. So, but I thought, like once you get these themes, start getting these themes on your belt, then you start like looking at like, yeah, Revelation starts taking on different flavor, and the whole Bible does, everything that Jesus did. And next week we're going to be talking about Acts and seeing how the disciples start. Well, Jesus start, yeah, and they start reaching the world, right? So we'll be talking about Acts and the world, and the way that Paul starts seeing that, and how Paul also starts bringing in all those themes, like with the Holy Assembly and all that kind of stuff, and even to the point where like he's going, why are you guys making suing each other when you guys are supposed to be the heavenly council making big decisions that are going to affect the world, and you guys are fighting about this nonsense. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We got that going on today, don't we?
Yeah, we definitely still do that. Church board meetings. All right, well, guys, we went pretty long today, but it was a good discussion. So I'll talk to you guys next week, unless you have any questions or comments. Do you need? You're giving me what?
Opportunity to ask them questions.
Oh yeah.
For them to ask.
All right. All right. Well, if there's no questions, and you're welcome, Cherie, and I hope you guys have a blessed week, and we'll see you guys here again next Monday. All right. Goodbye.
Bye.